passengers in the row. But that's a very simple way and effective way to combat that risk.
Okay.
You don't want to be on a long haul flight with me then, John. I routinely, whatever seat I'm in, get up and do yoga in the aisle, so people love that.
And in
Okay, I
terms
want to
of
see a photo or it never happened.
Oh,
and
well,
in
no
terms of
problem.
U.S. Medical practice, because of the rate of litigation, practice is mainly, centered towards um, defensive practices because everything you're doing, you are writing everything down, taking notes, because in case of litigation, all these notes and the action that you have taken, you have to justify every single step. Otherwise, the litigation rate is really high here. So it's different than other countries because either you need to have evidence-based information to support your actions. You cannot do offhand, over-the-counter usage of medication that kind of happen in other countries. Here you have to have a lot of thought in prescribing anything or taking any action because the litigation is so much, higher here than any other nation.
I'd thought about it for 2 hours, Your Honour, but the patient died before I came to a conclusion.
All right. So
Welcome back, Tyler.
thanks. The before I clearly we haven't started the tech news yet, but
Nope.
one non-tech the top story on BBC.com right now. There's only one worth mentioning. It's that Russia has bombed a Ukrainian passenger railway station and killing 25 in doing so. I remember mentioning, I think it was yesterday, that Russia would start doing more dramatic efforts in their, now that we're getting into the later stages of what I think is a bit of Russian desperation. And to highlight that, Ukraine did something truly, I think, rather brilliant today. Or actually, it was yesterday on the Ukrainian Independence Day. They rolled in a whole bunch of destroyed Russian tanks and artillery vehicles into the center of Kyiv, and made a really brilliant video by saying, the video starts by saying that in the opening days of the invasion of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin swore that Russian tanks would reach the center of Kyiv in 6 days. And she says, the narrator says, it took a little bit longer, but they finally made it, and we're here on our Independence Day to celebrate them now that they're here in the center of Kyiv. And he must be fuming if he gets to see that video. That's quite a brilliant way to twist his words. So anyway, there's that, and then we've got the tech news. But before we do the tech news, we got to do the air horn. Oh, there was one other non-tech news. I sent it in our private back channel thing, whatever, and it's that pictures from China. The world's third largest river has dried up. It's like in some parts in some major Chinese cities, it's more dirt than water.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
mentioned briefly
it's
just now, and then they were exposing the Buddha. I think, according to BB, was maybe from the Ming Dynasty 600 years ago.
Oh wow!
it's in Sichuan, in the southern west part.
Yep.
So yeah, it's really dry land.
Yeah, there's people have to see this video. This is one of the most kind of mind blowing videos I've seen in a while. Um, I just tweeted it. I just pinned it to the top of the clubhouse room, and I'm speechless. I've never seen anything like that. I mean, we just saw similar things in France and Germany, but nothing on this scale. The world's third largest river running dry.
So, do you think that that's why China is also so strongly collaborating with Russia or supporting Russia because they kind of think we will still, Russia has so much vast land that's kind of warming up and available for future food production. I guess, methane will be released and blah, blah, but and that should be very fruitful land in the future. So do you think that's kind of a future planning there?
Yeah. Um, I don't focus a lot on the future weather patterns of China and rainfall patterns of China. They have incredible rainfalls at times, floods, or I don't know they have periods where they have tremendous rainfall, and
Like monsoons almost.
yeah, exactly. And so they're having extremes on both ends, which are both rather bad actually when they reach those extreme states. So I don't know.
Tyler, BB, what river is that? Sorry.
Yangtze River, Changjiang Yangtze River. It's the
Yangtze River,
Yangtze River.
was the longest
Uh,
river.
it's
So
not
I
the
was
it's not the Yellow River, is it?
Yellow River
Yeah.
is right now. Actually, last year, Yellow River there were floods, pretty bad floods,
Oh,
and
really? Okay.
there were people dying in the tunnels. And as usual, CCP government covered. Actually, it was said more than 1,000 people were dead
Okay.
in that flood. And this
Okay.
year,
Yeah.
the drought in Yangtze River. So.
Yancy.
Yeah,
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
I
I have
had
a question.
a
Is
Chinese
this
guest
river?
speaker that is a climate researcher from China, and then he went back and he's in the U.S., but he went back and did analysis. And the thing is, if you count the total rainfall, you don't see big differences. But yeah, as Tyler said, the problem is where there's more rainfall and what happened before, and then where you have in total less rainfall, and it doesn't really look good because if you had a huge amount of drought before, you will just wash away all the fruitful land when the rainfall comes.
Right.
But in total, in the areas they really need it, there is less rainfall and less will be coming. And the problem is that farmers don't are not picking up the data science basically, and they try to educate, but so to plan the accurate crops and so on and so forth. So yeah, if you just look at the total, it doesn't look bad. So the new research looks at like different pocket areas, and then it looks very concerning.
So I have a question. Where does this river originate from? Is it coming from India or it has the local origination, like the mountain range? Where is it coming from? Because there were some plans I read in the past of some dams formation, whether the tributaries. Well, I need to see where this river was originating from and from where the dams are blocking it and which country have the control.
It's originally in China's one of China's province. It's called Qinghai province.
Okay,
So yeah, it's
it's in
near
China.
Xinjiang and Tibet. It's uh between not between, it's on the east side of both Xinjiang and the Tibet. Yeah.
I'm pinning a link to a really nice, impressive map of the river and its origins in Jinsha. It's
Qinghai.
basically the backside of Tibet, in
Yeah.
between Tibet and Xinjiang, and it's the backside of Tibet means it's the Chinese side of the Himalayas. So it's
Yes.
the
So, yes, Tyler. So that was my concern. The Himalayas recently, I mean, not very fairly recent, on the other side, they built some dams. So I was wondering whether that kind of was dividing the water source and the origination. I'm not sure whether the water source is completely arising from Tibet or there are some connection with on the other side where the dam is formed.
if you look at the map, it's clearly in Sichuan or Jinhua territory,
Qinghai. It's a
not
Qinghai province.
not Tibet.
Yeah, not Tibet, not Tibet. Totally from Qinghai province.
Yeah,
And yeah,
it's the link that I just put at the top of the clubhouse room. That's a humdinger of a photo of a river. That is beautiful. That's a really beautifully done illustration of a geography. That's amazing. Anyway, so that the fact that the idea that that river could get dry is very concerning. So, by the way,
is that
that river is used to generate a whole lot of hydroelectric power, and I imagine there are blackouts or timed blackouts where they turn off for an hour or two or three per day at certain parts along those rivers where those hydroelectric stations are not able to generate power. By the way, I had a conversation today with someone from Turin, Italy, who said that Turin, for the first time in history, is having scheduled regular daily blackouts. I'm sorry, not blackouts for power, water blackouts, where they turn off the civic or city municipal water supply for a few hours each day.
This makes the drills that I'm doing, Tyler, where we test turning off water power electricity for increasing periods of time sound less crazy now. It's actually happening.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Okay, so tech news. I already did the air horn, didn't I?
Yeah, but I think Cheryl had something pinned up. She wanted me to, and I'm just going to mention it. It's not going to be long, but if she wants to pin that back up, it's also China related. This was breaking news as we were on the while doing this room. So I know you always want to play another music, but we could skip that. This is breaking from the Wall Street Journal that the Chinese government's now going to allow American auditors to go to Hong Kong to audit the books of the Chinese companies that are listed on the New York Stock Exchange, because at one point they were not going to allow that, and then all these companies were going to get delisted, and so this is being done so hopefully these companies can stay listed on the New York Stock Exchange, because I thought they were all going to be relisted in Hong Kong. So that's pretty interesting, and it's kind of particularly given all of the frosty relations right now between the United States and China. It's very interesting that the Chinese are allowing it.
Do you think China is in bigger trouble than we know?
I'm following that narrative story rather closely. So to me, it's not an unknown. It's uh, rather rocky waters there at the moment. BB, you're unmuting.
I mean, we
Or
here,
rocky
every
lack of
member here,
water?
we will not be surprised if there is further domestic crisis.
Yeah, because, like the Yangtze River being dry, I mean, that's just inconceivable. That
Yeah.
was the river that they used to trade. They've traded on that river for since the beginning of my time.
Yeah, in modern days, because of the industry, I mean, we need the power to manufacture. So it seems it's more important on this aspect. But and from the ancient time, actually, it's the most. I mean, the land along the river, Yangtze River, are the most. Uh, Productive in agriculture and the other trading, like you use the ships to trade the salt. So right now, actually, just like Katerina said, the food supply uh, is the next thing we're expect to have a trouble with.
Well, and it also speaks to my principal concern about the climate warming models and climate change models, and that is that every significant event like this cascades into further consumption of fossil fuels. How are they going to ship water into cities that have no water? It requires a lot of energy. They've lost the hydroelectric potential of a river that was generating electricity. These knock-on effects are just going to reverberate across numerous parameters that lead to further global warming. So it's these kinds of events that illustrate the underestimation of the compounding of the contributions to global warming, and they themselves represent a further driver in that compound problem.
Okay, just touching on China, one other interesting non-tech item today. I just pinned it to the top of the room. U.S. Senator Marsha Blackburn to land in Taipei, Taiwan tonight. Coming on a yeah.
So China responded with a blockade map that Dr. Frank shared in the back channel.
They responded with a blockade. What?
Map. There's it's a map to how China can
How China
blockade
can corner Taiwan.
corner Taiwan. I
But
mean,
but that wasn't their. I mean, let's not confuse. That wasn't their response. Somebody wrote an
yeah,
article.
not the response,
Yeah,
but
right.
it
Yeah.
was
Okay. Yeah.
discussed these days.
Yeah. They're not going to. They're not going to react over Marshall Blackburn. They're sophisticated enough. They have people who understand American politics to realize that she's not the most relevant person in the world. They're not going to do anything because she landed in Taiwan.
And more European congressmen is expected here as well. It's like Taiwan is the hottest spot to take a picture on the Instagram for or on the headlines for these politicians.
All the cool senators are going there. So come on, be like the cool kids. Take a selfie in Taiwan.
We say no. That's the problem. We have to say yes to show our perseverance or strength here. But it's a dilemma. Actually, it's pretty hard to
Okay.
choose.
Okay. So we did the
And
air one. Yeah.
I just read that China's considering currently cloud seeding to combat and to help out the river. But I'll share it on Twitter.
Okay. So the first tech story for today is from the Washington Post. Peter Zadko, more commonly known in the hacker community as Mudge, although in the professional community he's known as the head of security or former head of security for Twitter, and he did a bit of whistleblowing in the past 48 hours, saying that not only is Twitter got a whole bunch of security problems, but yesterday revealed that Twitter was somewhat forced by India to hire Indian government officials as part of the domestic Twitter team in India, which then has access to Twitter data that they shouldn't, essentially. That's his that's sort of his suggestion. So
We read about that months ago, Tyler.
yeah, we
That
read
was
about things like that, about Twitter's delicate dance with India and how India is forcing Twitter to do and dance exactly how Modi would wish them to dance, and they're complying. The big headline today, though, is that Mudge will testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee on September 13th to examine his allegations of widespread security failures at Twitter. And there's a
By the
related.
way, his redacted testimony. Actually, there's a separate article in the Washington Post containing his redacted testimony, at least as relating to the bots. Now, I had read enough of it to get to the bot part, so I don't know if the India thing is in that. But there's a very long document that the Washington Post has with his redact. Actually, I think it's the redacted whistle. It's not his. It's not his forthcoming testimony. It's his redacted a whistleblower complaint. It's the official whistleblower complaint. And I would just summarize that in literally one or two sentences. The debate over the bots has to do with um, uh, how one defines a Twitter user. So Twitter's official metric that they're using, and he's saying that they changed it in 2019 to this. Um, it's called MDAUs, or which stands for monetizable daily average users, meaning that Twitter recognized already that a lot of the users, if you just count the aggregate number of users, are in fact bots, and they also knew they couldn't sell those to advertisers. So they figured out some way of figuring out how many, if they stripping out the bots, how many are monetizable that are real, obviously with some error rate, and that's how they get to the 5% or less. But there's a much larger number of users on Twitter than the MDAUs, and a lot of them are bots. And I don't think anyone knows what that number is. And the only reason why that number might be relevant, forget about the lawsuit, is because you as a consumer are going to be possibly engaging with bots without knowing perhaps that you're engaging with bots, because they do show up in your feeds. They're just not going to count them. They've made it he admits this, by the way, but they made a tremendous effort to not count them in what they're selling to advertisers, and that's why they have these MDAUs. But all of that's in the Washington Post, and I'll leave it there.
Alrighty. Moving along, from CNN, at an all-hands meeting, Twitter's executives pushed back against Mudge's complaint, and the Twitter CEO saying that a false narrative has been created. At a hearing seeking more data on bots from Twitter, at a hearing which was seeking more data about bots on Twitter, Elon Musk's lawyers are now citing the whistleblower Mudge's claims. Twitter says spam counts are merely estimates, and Ireland's government and France's government are investigating Mudge's allegations about Twitter following his complaint that referenced EU regulators. Sony raises the PS5's price in the UK, Europe, Japan, China, Australia, Mexico, and Canada by as much as 10%, citing rising inflation. And Amazon will stop offering Amazon Care at the end of 2022 after determining that it wasn't the right long-term solution for enterprise clients. FTX's Alameda Research, which is their investment side, if I recall correctly, the co-CEO of that, named Sam Trabucco, steps down, saying he's chosen to prioritize other things. And despite huge ad campaigns by crypto companies, a Pew survey of U.S. adults shows those trading crypto has stayed flat at 16% from September 2021 to July 2022, nearly a year, 3 quarters at least, totally flat at 16% of Americans dealing in crypto. Interesting that it hasn't gone up, despite all of that marketing and whatnot. HP.
By the way, Tyler, I should mention our friend Dr. Danish had tweeted out yesterday in regard to the Amazon news, which I agree with him, that the fact that they closed down this other thing in healthcare is because they just made 2 large healthcare acquisitions. It's not Amazon retreating from the healthcare market; it's them defining where they want to be in the healthcare market.
Right. Next up, HP makes some new hardware. Who cares? Baidu, which is China's Google, reveals its first quantum computer, which has a 10-qubit processor, and says it's developing a 36-qubit system. Pinterest confirms it is facing a probe by California Civil Rights Department, which has contacted a former staff member as a possible witness who complained about systemic problems at Pinterest, assumedly. Microsoft's Phil Spencer says he's encouraged by progress towards Activision Blizzard deal approval and believes exclusive games made for one platform are fading. NVIDIA did its Q2 revenue report. I don't think that's necessarily too exciting. Group IB researchers detail hacking group Octopus, responsible for the recent breaches at Twilio, and 130 other organizations gaining credentials of about 10,000 employees. So
Tyler, on the NVIDIA thing, the one takeaway that I think is maybe is newsworthy, they did say that because of inflation and people's pocketbooks being pinched, a lot of the gamers are holding back on buying equipment that's expensive and everything. So that's why they have they had some declines because people are cutting back because it's the gamers who buy all these things with expensive chips.
okay. All right, next up is ByteDance quietly launches its Wukong search engine in China, promising no ads in its results days after Tencent shut down its Sugo search app. Atlanta-based Bitcoin Depot, which operates over 7,000 Bitcoin ATMs in North America, plans on going public via a SPAC at $885 million valuation. The US and China are nearing a deal to let American regulators travel to Hong Kong and audit US-listed Chinese companies, including Alibaba and Baidu, just as Ken said.
I'm trying to figure out now where the opportunities are in cryptocurrency, being as how the big money has gotten in and everything is getting rolled up and going public and all the rest of that. Wasn't Bitcoin supposed to be the great leveler? What is the point now of dealing in cryptocurrency if you're going to be basically fighting Andreessen Horowitz? Or not fighting them, but competing with them.
Anyone want
Sorry,
to go ahead?
why do you say you're competing with them? I think that companies like Andreessen, et cetera, are providing the seed capital. I'm not saying this is good, bad, or indifferent, but they're providing the seed capital to be able for the protocols to build out their networks, because you can't raise that money from individuals. Then, as the protocols get built, tokens that are either governance or liquidity or other kinds of tokens then become available to people that are providing those things. So I think it's a stepped process that evolved out of the ICOs, which were public ways of raising money, which the Securities Exchange in the US don't allow. So I think it's a different kind of dynamic. I'm not saying that the VCs don't have advantages, but they have advantages as well in funding companies in which they get stock in.
Well, because there were uh, tokens and protocols before. I've been doing this for five years, no longer. 2013, okay, 9 years, and there have been more and more tokens and protocols. And what happens is somebody comes in and does something, and the tokens go to zero,
Okay,
and the protocols are replaced.
okay. Next up,
We'll
Google's,
talk offline, Francine.
all right, Google's Jigsaw and YouTube will test video ads in Europe to pre-bunk. That's what a lovely word, pre-bunk, instead of debunk. That's my new favorite word right there. Preemptively debunking, pre-bunk. That's awesome. So they will test video ads in Europe to pre-bunk anti-refugee sentiment after a study found that such ads raised awareness about misinformation. And looking at the article, it has a humdinger of a quote saying, quote, it worked for, they're talking about this concept of pre-bunking, running video ads to shape public sentiment, essentially. And it says, quote, it worked for conservatives and liberals. It worked for people who are already conspiratorial or not. It even worked for people who are very receptive to bullshit.
Yay, human beings are programmable.
Quote, my sense is that there is a significant amount of disinformation concerning Ukrainian refugees since the war outbreak, but that this is gradually becoming more visible. If we can pan out a little bit from the immediate event, anyway, yeah, pre-bunking. There's a sci-fi concept waiting to happen.
Sounds like propaganda with more steps.
Couldn't it be argued that warning all of the allies of the U.S. that Russia was going to invade Ukraine, wasn't that a pre-bunking?
Oh yeah, and COVID's not really going to be a problem. These are it's cool being able to call the future before it actually happens.
No. I mean something more about it, using intelligence to put out there that this thing's going to happen and forcing their hand. This whole thing we talked about with Taiwan and before Russia invaded Ukraine. Isn't that some form of governmental pre-bunking?
It's
Except that Russia had already lined up all of its forces along the border of Ukraine and denied that they had any intention of invading. So it was preemptive debunking, but the evidence was already present that Russia was denying their intent to invade, and so the U.S. attempt was to counter that. So I don't know if that qualifies as pre-bunking.
Rich. Rich has a thing in the chat, pre-propaganda. I think that's a great word for it.
Yeah, that's a wild. So
We're
Apple.
actually doing it, Tyler. We're actually doing a room today at 3 with Chris Warnoff. I think you know her, Heather Openshaw. She just got her MFA in like de-radicalization and disinformation. So we're doing
Yeah.
so we're doing our room today at 3 o'clock Pacific time. LaTeX and InfoSec. I just put it in the chat room. It's on disinformation campaigns, and we'll be spinning up a separate series on disinformation heading into the elections. And we'll more on that later.
Okay.
Huzzah.
Researchers, meaning cybersecurity researchers, identify more than 80,000 Hikvision cameras out of China that have yet to be patched for flaws allowing remote code execution despite fixes being available for months. And hackers, including state actors, stole NFTs worth more than $100 million in the first half of the year.
I'm sorry. I'm just imagining some divisions like Yoko, James Bond, and MI6. It's like the secret agents. It's like, all right, are we going to stop the nukes from from detonating from the terrorists? Are we gonna are we gonna paratrooper? No. Your job is to go to an art show and steal the NFT. It's like, yes, we the monkeys. It's vital for national security.
Apple announces an event for September 7th, 10 a.m. Pacific called Far Out, where it is expected to announce the iPhone 14 lineup, Watch Series 8, and more. And we will watch that live together, as we always do. The Ethereum Foundation says it will begin the merge on September 6th, split into two parts, the second running between September 10 and 20. Researchers detail a pro-US 5-year influence operation on Twitter, Facebook,
Gasps.
Instagram, and other platforms in the Middle East and Central Asia. And then it says from the Washington Post, Facebook and Twitter dismantle a U.S. influence campaign about Ukraine. Washington Post says a phony U.S.-friendly social media campaign prompts questions. New York Times says Facebook, Twitter, and others remove pro-U.S. influence campaigns. And Wall Street Journal says Meta, Twitter. Oh, sorry, where'd that one go? Wall Street Journal says, I can't read it. Meta, Twitter removed network of accounts that pushed pro-Western narratives. Forbes says Facebook and Twitter take down pro-U.S. propaganda. Well, now you're getting closer to the accurate words there. Word choice. Time says, when it comes to disinformation, America's Gulf allies are worse than the Russians. Okay. So now you know. America's also dabbling in a bit of social media propagandizement.
We invented much of it.
That's your big boring headlines for today. So now we get into the tweets. Did anyone have a tweet they want to make sure we covered today?
Did you cover Tesla stock split today and also the SpaceX and T-Mobile collaboration
Yeah,
event happening
Elon
tonight?
tweeted that he and T-Mobile's CEO are going to make an announcement. Was the announcement made already?
No, tonight, 7 p.m. Central
Okay.
Standard Time.
But Elon tweeted that this is a special event, or like, I forget exactly what the tweet was, but he was implying that this is a very special. Uh,
Even more special than normal.
Yes,
yes.
because it's the collaboration between T-Mobile and SpaceX satellite that may provide internet to various locations that are not accessible yet. And let's see how far along this collaboration is for, whether they are going to just continue as like separate entities or merge the
I
two
think I know what
companies
it is.
together. I don't know. Lots of speculation.
My guess would be that T-Mobile is going to buy a shit ton of SpaceX Starlink gear and allow T-Mobile customers, to have access to data in places that are outside of the normal network.
They
Meaning,
could fill out a lot of gaps in the map with that, and they could secure a very large amount of lucre from recent the with the Build Back Better thing from America rollout stuff. There's a lot of so just to clarify real quick, there was a bunch of programs rolling out rural broadband, and this program is very troubled for multiple reasons. The maps aren't accurate. IGPI was very much co-opted by the telecoms, etc. But one thing that there's a lot of subsidies essentially available. I'm sorry, not Tesla, SpaceX recently it ran into some trouble with this because OneWeb and other people aren't contesting it. It's a little bit of a thing. If T-Mobile essentially, if they partner with T-Mobile on that, they can probably hedge their bets on that and still get those federal subsidies at the same time as being able to fill out the map. T-Mobile gets to say, "Look, we've got more coverage than everyone else," and also one other random part about this is they also gain access to a very large number of radio engineers. There are not very many of those in the world. It's actually kind of shocking how small the industry is for how influential and how much of our electronics depend on that technology. It's like half of it's doing military radars, the other half is like doing 5G stuff. But being when you're doing like pushing the limits of what you can do with EM fields and such, it's helpful to have access to those sorts of things, especially when you're in a heavy regulated environment that limits the spectrum you can actually play with. So there's a lot of synergies to play with out there.
So I will be covering that live event today, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. And also, there were like in an article indication that the Starlink satellite would not be providing data in urban locations and may just limit themselves to faraway locations, perhaps on sea and areas on the land where there's no like phone company already providing services, but it's yet to be seen.
Conveniently, that also tells the telecoms we're not going to interfere on your turf, which
Yes.
that's for the telecoms. They don't want the rural markets. They've never wanted the rural markets. They're like, government pay us to build it, and they only do so begrudgingly, and if they even build it out, but they'll take the money regardless. So it's SpaceX saying we'll get all the gaps that you don't. That could make a lot of people very happy, and telecoms are a very chummy industry.
Especially with the rise of mobile housing, people trying, to stay in remote locations, for example, on the mountain, but then there is no internet service, available there. So I'm thinking that with this collaboration, those people would be able to gain satellite-based internet in remote areas while they're working from these beautiful locations.
okay, moving
Is he
right on.
perhaps preparing for an acquisition of Starlink to fund other ventures?
I don't think they've got enough money for it. They might be able to take some stock out of it, but it's that one has some ridiculous valuations on it. It's paying for SpaceX like SpaceX's valuation at the moment.
Okay, so
Yeah, and the stock prices are raised as well after the 3-for-1 split. Instead of 300 something, now it's 360, which is like a rise in the price. Although, now you can buy a share for 300 100 something instead of a
Just,
thousand.
just to be clear, because stock splits don't change the values of companies, and
No, no, it's not changing the value, but the evaluation of the split was like, okay, out of 900, 3-to-1 split would be 300 share each. Instead, the valuation of that share is now 360 each instead of 300. That's what I was pointing out.
Yeah, that's the Elon magic speculation because I think he operates at big scales and big plans. So I think he works or leans into that, whereas most companies might be in jeopardy in that situation.
I
Did we lost Tyler?
I think you lost Tyler. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
here. I'm still here.
Oh,
Is my mic not on?
We can hear
Now
you
you're
now.
yeah.
fine. Now you're okay.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so California to approve a plan to ban sales of gas-powered cars by 2035. So in about 13 years.
That's not news. That news is just regurgitation of previous announcements about how they're going to be phasing out gasoline cars. It's not even a new news announcement. Somebody just decided they're going to go write a story. Um,
having legal force is a little
There was
different from voluntary stuff.
yeah, and no, but Chris, that's like literally that's not new news. It's like there's nothing new from California that was announced. It's just somebody wrote an article of stuff that was already announced. I think the more pertinent issue is when they get out there, and I think people don't realize this. There are going to be still a whole bunch of people who can't afford. I mean, I heard prices are going down, whatever. There'll be a lot of people who can't afford to buy EVs, and there's going to be a lot of political pushback about an actual ban on gasoline cars. Well, I'm not actually thinking the ban's going to go into effect in
EVs
2035.
EVs will be
Yeah, but
cheaper by that
also
point.
wouldn't. Yeah, but also, I mean, there's already going to be all the non-EVs already on the road. How long do those last? And also, if that's the ban, couldn't you just go out of state and buy it and come back?
You just do a phase out. California essentially it's one of the largest markets domestically, so they end up influencing a lot of the other legislation and policies. But I mean, by that point, by 2035, electric combustion engines are near the end of their maturity life cycle. Like there's only so much you can do to squeeze out, a percent or two more performance. Electric vehicles are seeing, year by year, by cost per watt, by range, by anything related to essentially, like performance under extreme conditions, etc. You are still having a lot of stuff that hasn't been deployed on the electric vehicles that can radically bring the price down over time and while still increasing the performance. And it's already at parity on many components, not necessarily on price just yet, but it's close. Within about 10 years, you're going to well be underneath combustion engines for price points. So I don't think that's going to be as much of a concern. These are moving targets.
And in England, London, I think they also approved a huge bill passing to phase out the, gas-based car and facilitating EV purchases. I think by 2025, that's what they are aiming for. And these subsidies are geared towards mass adoption of EVs
If you
in
made the vehicle
England.
slightly smaller,
Hmm.
without changing any other parameters, just make them slightly physically smaller,
Slightly smaller.
you
Yeah, they're
can drop
working on.
way below price.
There are
Uh,
different models that are working on it, and there are different companies. There are many companies who are creating their own models according to their specifications. And also those buy, I forgot the name of those kind of vehicles, which are like a small, very small kind of a vehicle, but it's run by electric power and more than a bike but less than a car.
Pointing out that roads are not necessarily something that's always been subsidized by government. If you look at the history of the good road movement, that's actually a more recent thing in history, despite lots of marketing to the contrary. The highway system, the roadways, etc., are a form of subsidy to both electric vehicles and combustion vehicles. However, one thing that's really important to take into account is that, especially with combustion vehicles, that they have been discharged from liability under a lot of things that other industries would have been a thing. Everything from the lead poisoning stuff to essentially the CO2 emissions, to things from healthcare costs, from essentially from car crashes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The idea being, if you follow these rules and regulations, we're not going to hold you liable for these things. But it's important to recognize that those are a form of subsidies in themselves, not just in the act of we're going to give you money. It's providing a legal shield from essentially being sued for actually putting a social burden elsewhere. That form of protection is a form of subsidy, and it's important to put that into account when you're comparing different kinds of vehicles together.
Does anyone else have a story they can share? I need about 3 minutes. Or I'll
I
share.
Yeah, probably. I had tweeted out something. It's in like you should Cheryl should have it because I tweeted it out yesterday. There's a new survey out about I think it says I have to go back to it. I think 60% of I want to read this here. Nearly 60% of Americans now stream video daily on smartphone, tablets, and computers. So they're basically pointing out that 60% of Americans are now getting video programming on something other than a traditional television, and so that she should have that story.
Okay.
ad algorithms behave very strangely. Someone sent me a video of a duck and a magic trick, and now I've got ads over all my Twitter feeds. About one third of it is about full of ducks right now. They look adorable. That's not really a news item. I just find it fascinating seeing how ad algorithms can sometimes go awry. I've now Twitter is now just a bunch of ducks for me. It's hilarious.
Okay.
Yeah,
What
and just going back to video games for a second, on the video because I
huh?
had looked back at the
The
thing,
double house?
their gaming division
They want.
was
I can
down
answer
like
you.
thirty
They're going
five
to clean
percent, so it
now.
was really significant
I have total for the
in terms of
restaurant,
what I described before. That
but
the gamers are buying less stuff. I should
2,870.
also point out in their tech earnings, by the way,
No,
uh,
10 p.m. At
Autodesk
10
and
o'clock in the morning.
Snowflake
I take
actually
double
beat
house and in
numbers.
house together.
Snowflake
Okay.
they had really good numbers. So
What
not
more do you need to
everything in
say?
tech is negative news. And then also Twitch announced that they're not going to maintain their how do I define it? They have these people who stream on
He
Twitch,
says
the people who play the video games, whatever. Some of them have like
invite
exclusives
for
with
3 days
Twitch, and they're not going to enforce the
and
exclusives anymore.
another
So
invite for two
their
days.
regulars can now go to other platforms. Twitch, by the way, is owned by Amazon, and again, that's a big deal in video gaming, which again is always
How much
I
are
always
these?
feel a very important industry that often gets overlooked how big it is.
Quick little thing on Autodesk: they have a monopoly on it's kind of like the Adobe, but for civil engineering and factory engineering, etc. One of the things is
Okay.
that they have a different customer base than a lot of the rest of the tech sector. In fact, when you actually look at what they actually sell, it's design solutions for engineering firms. The reason why that's relevant, and they also have Maya and stuff, which is also very popular in the movie industry for special effects and stuff. The reason why that's relevant is that if you see essentially a very strong tech sector thing going down, while you
They
see
could be
essentially
nice
Autodesk
now.
going up, that's more of a signal of what's happening in the construction and factory space, which is
And small
it's a
ones, one big
precursor
one.
signal.
No,
So
one big one.
you're seeing that would signal that you're having factory construction, a lot of new designs, a lot of new products essentially being designed, or buildings essentially being customers buying well
Ooh,
there.
double
So
house.
that's an interesting little segment there.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I added some to Twitter. Um, California winemakers are actually now using AI to um, still get wine growth with climate changes. So I think every farm in the future needs to adapt to that. I think it's really interesting. Then that there's a new artificial skin developed by MIT that they just
2870.
released the news about that
Let's
doesn't
see. 400.
need any chip or and
Five.
it's wireless electronics
Laundry.
to monitor health. It's really interesting.
20.
So if
5.5
there's a
liters.
change in pulse or chemicals or sweat or even ultraviolet light exposure to skin, changes the pattern of the surface, acoustic waves on the gallium nitride film, and this film is more like easier because you don't need a battery, you don't need to hook it up to anything, you cannot hack it. So I think that's really exciting for the future. Hopefully they make more devices like that that are kind of unhackable because they don't need to hook up to any network. Then artificial sweeteners are actually harm the sugar levels and shouldn't be assumed safe, and this was studied in Israel, and then this in Spain. And this is also regulations in Portugal, but they not every county can put that in place because they don't have enough money. But um, in South Europe, they have regulations that you have to water your surrounding land to prevent wildfires. So in Spain, they built like a really cool network of towers that use recycled water. And with that, they water their trees and their land to basically build a guard for wildfires efficiently. And yeah, as I said, it's supposed to be regulated in Portugal also if you have land that you have to kind of do that, but not everyone does it. But it's quite efficient method.
Very quickly on the touch paper, that one was really cool. I really enjoyed reading that paper. One of the things that's really fascinating about it is that imagine essentially just having like a flat almost like a cloth. And imagine a bunch of tiny little columns sticking out from it. And when you poke essentially any part of it, it actually puts the columns at a different angle. Now that's essentially an effect that if you actually emphasize with the materials like reflectivity, etc., and you put in a control condition just by basically having like a camera pointed just above it, what's interesting is you can actually infer a bunch of different stuff you aren't able to do with normal sensors. You can get pressure and sensitivity, of course, but you can also get like angles and some really weird, more nuanced stuff. And the really interesting thing apart about this is that it ties the touch sensitivity technology to the camera vision technology, which is growing by leaps and bounds right now. You can get cheap little $15 Raspberry Pis that can do localized TensorFlow vision algorithms and run a cheap little 256 or 512, little, tiny little camera on there that runs like black and white. That's enough to interface with this. So what's really interesting about this is that that's actually ties touch sensitivity and interface technologies into another research R&D chain, which is receiving tens of billions of dollars worth of AI research these days. And so what's cool about it is once you chain those technologies together, you can see very rapid improvements in a very short period of time. So the cost component is one of the biggest ones, though, because the whether or not we can build something that has amazing capabilities, we at the upper end of the spectrum. If you've got a few $1,000,000, you can build like the most amazing robot. Have it jump and do backflips over shipping containers and all sorts of cool things. But if you want to make it actually something that people are going to use outside of like a cool YouTube video, you got to make the cost point work way on down there and the reliability be high enough that you can work in factories or in other conditions. What's fascinating about these touch technologies is being able to manipulate small objects. The nimbleness, the mobility aspect is tied very much for the ability for the robot to know whether or not it's going to crush an object when it kicks it up or not. When we have our own fingertips, we have extreme sensitivity with those, and that's somewhat difficult to build sensors that are cheap enough and affordable enough to actually have those capabilities. Um, what Katarina is describing there is actually this research is fascinating, is that it drops the price point not just for building the robots on a touch sensitivity, but also being able to have robots in every situation, in every circumstance, being able to manipulate objects. And that's going to be a big breakthrough for essentially being able to have other things work elsewhere. It's not necessarily this specific innovation, it's being able to tie the research threads together. So this is a really good long-term direction to go for, and you're going to see a lot more of these, especially when we start seeing soft robotics and other types of technologies that are really, really exciting.
Yeah, one capability as a result of that technology would be, for example, to have a robot that could do plumbing or plumbing work. Because
Sure.
right now that's said to be one of the domains that's kind of difficult because of the kind of dexterity and pressure sensitivity that's required to operate either with live lines or even things that are turned off. It takes a certain kind of elegance, if you will. It's very much impressive when you see a plumber pull off something, I would say, especially like on something like a Navy ship, for example. So, but I think, as Elon put it, he expects people, maybe in a decade or so, to be buying their grandparent or their parents a retirement robot. Hey, here's a nurse robot that can kind of help you out around the house and do stuff. And if it could do that kind of plumbing type work, that was seen as the last kind of continent of technical abilities with respect to robotics that humans were kind of superior up until now, perhaps.
Philosophically,
Yeah,
you can design the
especially
world to be more fit for robots or design robots to be more fit for human environments. And there's different pros and cons for going either approach. When you build in a factory condition, you're designing everything around for the robots because that's essentially the thing you're spending all the money on. When you're designing for built environments where you're trying to make the robots more human-like so they can go upstairs, etc., it's a very different design space. One of the most interesting things that we're starting to discover is that there's this in-between section where if you partially make very small adaptations like to door handles or to small objects that you're manipulating to make it just a little bit easier to grab, a little bit easier to do computer vision, etc. But you're ultimately not working on an already existing built environment. You have some extreme advantages. When you're talking about the retirement cobots and the retirement robots and stuff for the retirement, you already have versions of this for cobots in factories and such. Where I mean, we're actually designing some things for our own company, things where we're literally looking at, well, we could design a custom machine engineering thing for that, or we can just buy a $10,000 cobot and just have it in that one position. It takes an hour to program, and then we can just run it 24/7. That's the sort of technologies you can have access to right now, and it's a very very exciting future when you're starting to see stuff pop up in everything from shipbuilding to small machining to restaurant applications. It's becoming very exciting with robotics. There's been a lot of okay, robotics is just a few years away, but it's kind of fun because right now it's actually starting to get deployed, which is very very exciting.
Yeah, especially because there are so few males when you get older as a woman, but also to to make up for the males that are missing with fine touch. But this skin is actually for monitoring health, and what everyone was missing the point is that this technology doesn't need chips or a battery hookup or stuff like that. So it's, if you want to keep your data safe, that or not, that it doesn't get manipulated by anything. If you would add, let's say, also stimulation and stuff like that, this is the safest way to be unhackable if it doesn't need to be hooked up to anything really. That's a cool thing about it. And the other thing is that these technologies also for people that are paralyzed or lost some kind of sensory information due to disease, getting older, or whatever. These technologies that kind of feed your brain sensory information that your body can't perform anymore can actually make up for it and keep you healthy. This was shown by different neuroscientists that they can, some people even regain like muscle control and homeostasis control and so on. So this will also help regeneration of the body. So it's really
What do you
exciting.
mean by unhackable?
So yes, did you actually read the article? So what this thing is, artificial skin patch that doesn't need battery, and it doesn't need any chip. Okay, so so the data it gives you is a sound wave kind of data. Of course, if you collect the data and you're hooked up to the internet or something, then you're hackable. But the actual processing on the skin, the information processing, is without the chip and without the need of battery. So at least the direct source on the edge, it's unhackable because of
Could
that.
you, would you mind sharing the article here in the group chat here in the room? I'd like to take a closer
I
look.
think I've already retweeted at the TNATW. Can take a look there.
Okay, we'll take a look. Thank you.
Yeah, the link is on top.
Okay, back to the tweets. Katarina found this one from Reuters that actually, before I retweet it, let's play our favorite game, Tech News Jeopardy. According to this Reuters article, how many people face acute food insecurity? How many millions of people now face acute
Globally,
food insecurity globally? Yes, globally.
Approximately 1.2 billion.
1.4.
60% of the population.
How many million?
1.4 billion.
Oh,
300.
in millions?
100,
Okay.
100 million.
5 billion.
That's far too low. The actual global insecurity for food resources right across the world, count Africa and China, is approximately 1.2 billion.
I think that might be food insecurity. This is acute food insecurity.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Different question. Yes.
800 million.
500 million.
800 million is closer.
340 million.
Get them some
Okay, good.
potato seed sprays at high altitude.
They're carrying high insecurity versus you're going to starve to death in 3 days versus just worrying about getting your food. Okay, about 300 million works. Yeah.
So it's
Sorry,
doubled.
not to
It's
interrupt.
doubled since 2019, according
And yet food
to.
prices are down, which is weird because everyone's expecting them to skyrocket with the Ukraine stuff.
So here, I'll pin the link for those who want to deep dive on it. Here we go. There we go. I just retweeted it as well to the Tech News Twitter account. A number of people facing acute food insecurity worldwide has more than doubled to 345 million since 2019. Before coronavirus crisis, 135 million suffered from acute hunger worldwide, said Corinne Fleischer, the World Food Programme's regional director. The numbers have climbed since and are expected to soar further because of climate change and conflict.
And
The
World
impact.
Bank forcing food insecure regions to grow cash crops for export to Western nations, and they'd have very nasty diplomatic things if you don't do that because how else are they going to pay off their debts?
And especially too because some of the Western nations are no longer using nitrogen fertilizer because they're considered to be a climate change issue. So the food production from the Western nations is going to go down. Somebody's going to pick up the slack, which means a lot of people are going to starve.
Yeah,
Doesn't have to be that way, but it is the way if you've done very poorly, which is how things typically go done.
or you could, yeah. I mean, looking at Sri Lanka.
Okay. Yes, I'm agreeing with you guys. By the way, we're on the same
Keeping
page
some
here.
regions regionally unstable and unable to provide their own domestic food security, saying, well, at least you're tied in with trade in the global system. That is politically useful for certain groups, depending on which country you're in. There's certain political forces, etc.
Right.
When we talk about with solving food insecurity, etc., it's worth considering when we talk about these things that some groups actually want people to be food insecure. When you take into
Bad
account those
guys,
groups, it makes it a lot easier to essentially figure out how to actually solve the problem.
to your point, bad guys make money off of conflict. They want conflict. They want these problems because bad guys make money from them.
It
We can
doesn't
go
even.
back to Hitler.
Sorry, go on.
We can go back to however far you want to go. Go back to Greece. Go back to Rome. Go back to Sparta. Can even go further back to the vertex. Bad guys make money on strife.
You can also make money on just like it doesn't even necessarily be like outright evil or outright bad. It can literally just be essentially like indifference. As an example, during World War II, when they were facing insecurity in both Britain and USA, as an example, they encouraged people to grow victory gardens. And that is saying, well, you should. How much food security can we meet essentially just by growing front lawns and public parks, etc. And rooftops, apartments, etc. And so they encourage everyone to grow their own food for victory as a thing. Now, what's interesting is during that they actually had Eleanor Roosevelt actually put a lot of her political points around this, and the agricultural industry was actually horrified at this, and they're like, "Well, if people are growing their own food, why would they buy our stuff essentially from the farms of the rural areas?" So they actually wanted to push back heavily on it, but it was during World War II, and they had like supply board and such for the war supply, and they overruled them and went, "No, no, no, this is something we need to have this." So there was actually about a third of the calories people were eating during World War II, domestically USA, were actually coming from food self-sufficiency, which when you're looking at depictions and essentially like hour labor estimates, it wasn't that bad. You're looking at like an extra hour or two a week, it wasn't that bad. What's interesting about this is that after the war, one of the first things they did is they passed a bunch of zoning regulations to make that illegal in a bunch of cities afterwards, and then it forced everyone to go buy at the new supermarkets and such. But the reason why this is relevant is when
Right.
people are talking about whether or not it's possible to grow your own food or other things. It's like we've done it, and it's actually provides significant portions of food supply. It can be done most areas in the world. And it doesn't even for the most or extreme areas you can do like greenhouses and other things. But the reason I bring this up is that the food security is an artificial problem in most environments. It's not always that case, but in many cases it is. And when people have food self-sufficiency, it means that you can't sell them stuff. So you can't sell them certain food products, etc. So that's worth taking into account, in that having a need means that you can now have a market, and sometimes that's useful, but it doesn't need to be that way.
And to find out how, every weekday, we tell you how.
Very well said, Chris. Exactly. We completely agree. Because if you create poverty or need, therefore you can supply that, that gives you power. And that's the whole cycle you're talking about. So, yes, you nailed it. Very well said, sir.
Okay. Solar power, this is from Katerina via CNN. Solar power is booming in Germany as Russia turns down the gas. People on the front lines of Europe's gas crisis are scrambling to get solar panels for their homes and businesses as they confront a perfect storm. Yeah, energy prices are tripling and quadrupling for home owners in Germany. I just had a German.
Germany's desperate. They're like literally saying, "We'll buy freaking hydrogen. We don't care what it costs. We'll get from Canada. We'll get from Australia. We'll get like anything. We'll get
Yeah.
nuclear, anything." It's like, well, can you get prime ministers that
Well,
formerly were head of Germany not to serve on Russian oil company gas pipeline companies? It's like,
you mean that Germany shouldn't have people serving on Gazprom working for them? Yeah,
it's just
right.
funny because
Just details,
Winter is
they're
coming.
Gerhard Schroeder was a significant player.
they vetoed a lot of domestic energy policies specifically that would have given them the sort of security that they essentially need right now, specifically because essentially some senior government officials made a lot of money with some of those east-west integration pipelines. And now they're going, oh shit, maybe we shouldn't have done that. And they're willing to pay a lot
Also,
of money to fix it in a short period of time.
they just shut down 2 nuclear power plants in Germany, 2 in France. Well, France was energy independent because 87% of the power was supplied by nuclear power plants. And let's turn those off. Yeah, let's make us more dependent.
Okay.
To your point, I'm
Yep.
agreeing with you.
So Evan found one from The Guardian that Chinese behemoth Pinduoduo to take on Amazon in the US with even worse labor practices.
What?
So
Yes.
one of the world's biggest e-commerce companies is known for rock-bottom prices and allegedly brutal conditions.
More ruthless than Bezos. Wow.
You think Bezos was bad? Try China.
Yeah,
Um,
try China.
that's the headline
Sorry to
from
step
The
in.
Guardian.
If Christopher Hitchens was still alive, he would say, at least you can die and leave North Korea and China. If you try to kill yourself, they'll catch you with a net and back to work you go.
Um, I think it's interesting to see Pinduoduo's name in Western media. I think this is a first.
This is their marketing. This means that they're gonna. This means that all these newspapers, the Guardian, etc., they're giving a lot of coverage. This is part of the business model where, but that means they need to up their advertising budget in these regions. And before you know it, like 5 years from now, it's like we interview the CEO to talk about their exciting expansion plans and how they're basically addressing labor issues.
So, compare is in the entertainment industry, there's always a Chinese model or actor or actress involved because China is now the biggest market. The United
It
States is still
used
the
to be.
biggest economy, but China's catching up, except they've got a real mess going on there, too. I'm not
as
going to
an
get into that.
as a counterpoint of an interest thing, there's a Marvel movie recently where they're like Shanghai and like the X number of rings. I don't remember how many rings it was, 5 rings, 9 rings, whatever. The thing about the movie is it's all China themed. It's like, they've got dragons, they got Asian actors, they got all this stuff together, except due to the plot or whether it was due to some trade thing with China or whatever. So they've spent all this money to make it all China themed. Marvel's like, Marvel and Disney, they're like, great, we're gonna it was gonna be a shoe in for Chinese market. They didn't get the quota, so China didn't let them show it in China because they didn't like one of the themes or whatever. And so,
They actually banned it, Chris. Yes.
yeah, so Hollywood's done this for a while. There is some rumors going around. I don't know. You can look at up more of the articles on it that they're going, like, if you see an example, like Top Gun had a thing where the original story is flying in and there's got like a Taiwan patch because there's a whole thing about the flying tigers, which is a fascinating bit of, if you want to see like history of USA China, that's not most people don't know about. That's a very important one. But they changed out the patch to be not Taiwanese, to appease the China stuff. And it took a while during COVID and other things. And they're like going, maybe we can do a few more reshoots on this. And well, China relations kind of dropped down a little bit. So they're like, let's make America happy again. And so they start re-releasing it, and they change out the patches to be, oh yeah, it's Taiwan again and stuff. It's not
They
North
changed
Korea.
patches to be non-denominational. They're not actually identified with any country. Yes, boom, you got it.
Right. And so the Hollywood goes with who pays for things, and when you have China buying up movie studios and saying we're going to have this number of exclusive launch slots, etc., that was the thing when they were going to do a market, because this is what they promised every company, saying, look at our access to our giant market. This is why you have the Rousseau brothers going in and making Wolf Warrior, and that becomes a part of their diplomacy thing. Is the most watched movie in China, where they're kicking American ass in Africa stuff, and blowing up people, and yeah, that's like a thing. But what's happens is that once they clone an industry, they don't need you anymore. They've got their own enough stuff domestically, and they've now crossed that threshold with their movie industry, and so you're seeing a huge decline on the idea of essentially importing essentially Western directors, Western special effects, etc., because they have enough domestic groups that can do it now. So yeah, it's just one more of those industries.
Okay, here we go. Going into the home stretch here. I got to jump. Sephora pays $1.2 million to settle a California suit accusing Sephora of selling customer data without telling their customers.
Gasp.
And now you know who's selling all the data.
That just means that their
Yep.
lawyer essentially needs to have one more paragraph that no one will ever read, that theoretically gives like it's like if you do like the mystic incantation, around the campfire or whatever. It's like, okay, it's like if you cross your hands and do a circle 3 times and put the end user license agreement that says your data may be sold to a third party, you now are magically immune to $100 million lawsuits for selling customer
Bait,
data. It
bait.
doesn't.
Do law
It
firms
doesn't change the practice.
recruit for something with a title of like chief obfuscator or something like that?
Oh,
We
totally.
don't need to. Those no. First off, no one reads the privacy policies. They're all like what, between 10 and 50 pages long. And to Chris, it's not even
Yeah.
a sentence; it's a word. You just add, "We can use your data for," and I think they just have to use that one word, "sell."
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
surprising. They
it's
didn't.
even worse.
Yeah, they didn't.
By the way, there's somebody else in the room here is a data security expert. I'm decent at it. Somebody else in the room is much better than me, so you may want to listen to her.
Jennifer has lots of great cybersecurity conferences, things, and yeah, she brings some cool people to the table.
Okay, well, speaking of cybersecurity, Eric found a hilarious one from the Washington Post that a Dutch hacker named Victor Gevers claims to have logged into President Trump's Twitter account 6 years ago by guessing the password, "You're fired." Then he did it again more recently with the new password, MAGA 2020.
My Duff 2020. Also, you're fired, but you spell it with a capital Y zero. Never mind. I shouldn't know this.
This is where it gets to be fun. It's like, oh, it's okay. It's not like it's like nuclear secrets or anything like that.
Okay, next up, brain fog.
Is his
Scientists.
next password? Don't you have another color of orange for me?
There's
Uh,
actually Orange Man spelled with elite, but yeah.
John, the next one is up your alley. Scientists are finally starting to understand the condition of brain fog and how to treat it, which encompasses brain fog, which encompasses memory problems, lack of mental clarity, and an inability to focus, has eluded scientists' scrutiny until COVID-19 thrust it into the spotlight. Now we're starting to learn more about what exactly it is and how we can beat it. And I'm retweeting that one from New Scientist. The next is from Saudamini.
Oh, can
I,
we
I think I think I
talk
read
about
that.
it a little bit? I shared that one.
Yeah, I think if it's the same article in New Scientist, I think I read it, and I think they're beginning to overgeneralize from some very localized research results. But I'll take another look at it and see. But um, I think we're oversimplifying. There are, as we talked about earlier this morning, there are multiple pathways to anatomic damage, and we know in the brain there are at least 4 different patterns on MRI scan that reveal damage from acute COVID that persists. So these magic single point of pathology and single point of therapy are encouraging, but we need to make sure that we don't exclude other causes in our rush to celebrate a scientific breakthrough.
See Alzheimer's research.
It's actually related to ALS research too, and also certain mitochondrial diseases that impact Alzheimer's and certain forms of dementia. Sorry to butt in, but yeah.
Okay, next up, Samsung reinvents the toilet for the poor with the Gates Foundation. Samsung said on Thursday it has successfully wrapped up a project with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to develop a prototype toilet. And being Samsung and being the Gates Foundation, how much you want to bet there's some data in that toilet?
Or even for the rollout of where it's deployed.
That's loads of data. Loads and loads of data. Um, Samsung said it plans to provide licenses of patents pertaining to the project to developing countries during the commercialization stage without receiving royalty fees.
Toilet patents on a 200-year-old technology?
Smart toilets. It's more of a computer in the shape of a toilet.
So
Although
I have some comments on this. Do we think that emerging market or frontier markets will, given how skeptical they are of Gates, there's still a lot of conspiracy theories about COVID vaccines, etc., and even in the ag space with GMO,
exactly.
would they trust Gates and Samsung with the Samsung toilet that
I
sucks
can see. I can see.
your data from your literally from your behind?
Yeah. From your shit, they're stealing your shit. What are you doing with my shit, Gates?
No, basically a
A
DNA
shit ton of
analysis,
data.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
also what food you eat, that kind of stuff. It's very simple analysis. It's
Let,
interesting
let
too.
alone
Low
your
flow
DNA.
toilets.
Forget that. They're going
Low
straight
flow.
for the DNA. They're building the DNA
Yes,
database.
Yep.
exactly. Low flow toilets. I just had them as about a year ago. Replaced my apartment completely. Low flow because hey, don't waste water. Water is a resource. The next big war, by the way, is going to be over water, not energy.
Get out of here.
Um. Oh, I'm not kidding.
That never comes up in these rooms.
Take a look at it. But the thing is that if they can
And
analyze your
Chris is being
DNA and
sarcastic.
what you've been
It's a
eating, they
daily
can track
topic.
you.
I love this guy. He's like, he doesn't realize what he's missed over the past year and a half. That's what I just, it's cracking me up.
Dane, it's a daily topic, and
Every
Tyler's view is that
data,
they're going to start tracking
everything
all
you,
of your
everything you've
bio.
said on this stage in the past 20 minutes, we've talked about daily for a year and a half.
We're coming
It's
in.
popular.
We're coming
Okay,
in.
I'm just catching up. Sorry,
Yeah, that's
I'm
all
very
right.
slow.
That's
And
right.
also, the early detection of certain viruses and parasites and all that. So, health related data and how health companies or some other, diagnostic procedures based manufacturers may be interested in that data because many COVID studies also were performed even in areas of New Orleans on sewage based, presence of the virus, and they were able to detect early on because of the sewage based studies the new virus form. So that kind of data and stool analysis is used to be reserved for labs, but no longer.
Okay.
Now it's going to be a lab in your toilet. In fact, our company is working on sensors that detect particular proteins, and interestingly enough, certain viruses have unique biomolecule signatures that they give off when they actively replicate, like double-stranded RNA, that is easier to detect sometimes than the actual virus itself. So the next gen of toilets, it's not only going to have Alexa and Al Green, but it's also going to have a little bit of sequencing on the side, perhaps.
Hold on. I'm registering the domain name. Put your dumb ass on a smart toilet. So,
Again, I'm going to raise the issue of your health data and how HIPAA or any other organization is not covering or protecting you. So be very mindful if you are going to use these technologies in terms of what you are signing for, how much data of
Well,
your health related stuff is being released to these companies.
You know, they made fun of like the North Korea when he's like saying, I've got my own strategic toilet that I go to some of these like, global security summits or whatever with, and the people are making fun of him for it. It's like, well, he was just a little ahead of the times.
Yeah, and a
so
lot of you guys don't forget a lot of this data is helpful. I mean, we're tracking. Eric just brought up, and as Aaron brought up, that's how they track a lot of the COVID stretch and depth is through the wastewater. So this isn't all bad. And also, again, HIPAA applies to organizations, not to just because it's health data. It applies to the covered entities and how they, how they use it and transfer it amongst companies, et cetera.
I have a
Yeah,
friend that
and
works for what was a consumer company. They had created like a tracking bracelet type kind of thing for kids or whatever, for like health things. But it was a consumer product, and then the FDA said, "Wait, that's not actually a consumer product. That's actually a health care product. So you actually have to disable 80% of your features, and you have to comply with this
Yeah,
3-year essentially regulatory thing."
Yep.
yeah, no,
So
they've rolled it out. You're right, Chris. They've rolled it. It's FTC that's rolling it out as well. They're rolling it out to all the fitness app devices because they are collecting such all that biometric data. So those are starting to come under HIPAA. I forget if that's already been rolled out, but so your Apple Watch, your Fitbit, your whatever the hell Whoop, Aura, et cetera, are all and more.
which regulatory agency decides to run over you with things like that determines a lot about whether or not you even have a company or not. And for some of these, when it's one thing when you're backed by Johnson and Johnson and you've got billions of dollars of R&D to play with. It's another thing when you're Google and you can afford to literally have your chief legal counsel will literally become head of the FDA, or but with Apple where they literally put a board of directors member as they just Johnson Johnson, like one or two other pharma people. You can do those sorts of things when you're a big tech giant. If you're a tiny little scrappy startup that's like, hey, we funded our initial prototypes on Kickstarter and give away all our equity. We have just enough to get to the next round of product releases, and well, I guess we don't exist anymore because now we're regulated by a group that now requires our entire revenue
Chris,
for the last
yeah,
3 years.
100%, and that's in every industry too. I mean, that's what they use regulation. It's like antitrust. It's like regulation to squash all these startups because there's no way they can comply. And that's huge. That's how nuclear was, generally squashed, and in research there done. But yeah, exactly. Good examples.
yeah, biotech is an interesting problem, though, in trying to regulate it because, interestingly enough, once DNA leaves your body, it's abandoned property. It's just treated like private property, legally speaking. In fact, there's a famous legal case involving the CEO of Marvel and a crazy Canadian in Mar-a-Lago, of all places. So if folks want to read about that, I'd recommend checking that out to see how, just merely touching a cup and throwing it in the garbage, hey, there's your DNA. What should the rules be around that? Or when you take a shit in a public toilet, at what point can somebody intercept that
Oh
package?
gosh,
So that goes
oh
more
gosh,
to
I see the Supreme
privacy. Yeah,
Court
that goes to
cases.
rights to privacy. What's your expectation of privacy there? That's how they're manipulating that.
Hang on, I can see the Supreme Court cases in the future happening about this. It's like shits for giggles, shits for coins, and this becomes essentially like the whole thing about we're gonna have like some Bitcoin mining thing
Shit
fueled off the,
privacy, Supreme Court now, USA.
or they'll do like the thing where they where they like sue like for where they have like they sue like the actual property itself for when they're doing essentially like asset forfeiture or whatever. So you have Supreme Court versus pile of shit.
I can also
Rupert
see someone starting a startup that you can cover your shit after you had a shit to mask it from data being
Headlines
used
we
right
in
need
now.
we need
intelligence.
a proof of shit.
I'll fund the Series A.
Yeah. Okay, next from Saudamini, Snapchat agrees to pay $35 million over illegal user data collection. So you can add Snapchat to the ever-growing list of data
That's like what,
hoarders.
like 60 seconds of profits?
Yeah.
They're
So
like the lawyer sits down and takes out his pocket watch. It's like, okay, let's see, let's wrap the fees. Okay, tick, 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 tick. Okay, that's enough now. All right, now back to what we were doing before.
and Katerina found this one from Bloomberg that I'm retweeting now. Air-conditioned clothing becoming the latest way to beat the heat. Sales of
That's a
jackets
big
and
deal.
vests with built-in fans are climbing as more places endure stifling temperatures.
Consider that heating and cooling a body might require essentially like sensors or certain a certain thermal regulation, like power systems that are like, let's say $300, let's say even $1,000. Compare that to the cost of a, oh, I don't know, $100,000 HVAC system for a large, multi-story building. When you compare the cost for heating cooling people compared to cooling and heating cooling very large spaces, uh it actually comes out very favorable in terms of doing as a fashion choice. Right now, the fashion industry is built around the ideas fast fashion, supply chains, etc. They're going to need other ways of differentiating out as that manufacturing ends up becoming a thing and geopolitics start banning trade from certain regions. This is one way the fashion industry could differentiate itself at actually going to essentially much more functional clothing rather than whether or not it looks good on a runway or whatever.
That's the
Um,
that's the
yeah.
optimistic perspective. I would raise the issue that the boiling frog is now wearing an ice jacket.
All the cybersecurity things. Okay, so you hit a thought, everyone boiled to death.
What? How
Or
about
you
this?
just don't
How
notice,
about
or you just
fucking move when you get to the point that you need a refrigerated jacket?
We're all wearing one of those Mylar things they
Okay,
have, like when
so
they're in like heating giant
here's
steel
my.
vents.
I want to give a quick thank you shout out to Saudamini, Maba, Andrea, Evan, Jeff G, and Eric, and Joe Williams, and Joyce, and Hector, and Stein, and Ben, and everyone else who kindly gave me 10 seconds yesterday for my little Google review thing that I'm cooking up. If you're willing to help me out as well, just click on the link at the top of the room and send me a DM and say, I'll help you out, Tyler, with your Google review situation. And anyways, that ends it for today, Thursday. Of course, we will meet again.
Short, Tyler.
Yes?
Didn't I wrote something for
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
like
but you did a long time.
Oh
You
yeah,
did
I
it back in
can.
the old days with the OG Tech Newsers. So
oh,
if
okay.
you haven't participated in my Google review scheme, just if you have already, thank you very much. And if you haven't, please click the link that's no longer at the top of the room, which which was the
Oh,
Twitter
see, I'm gonna change it now. Yeah.
twitter.com/TNATW and hit me in
Out
that.
of curiosity, is the
Yes,
reason you're only doing Google and not TripAdvisor or some
yes.
other?
Well, we'll circle around a month from now when I've milked everybody for their Google reviews, and we'll do TripAdvisor.
You have a chance to do it all. No
Yeah.
worries. Okay. Ben has a room.